Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome back. Been a long time, but I wanted to meet with you very briefly to discuss about um, our topic. So before we start, I just want to know if you hear me. Are you guys able to hear me? Okay, thank you, Aubrey. Yeah, because I'm not in my usual place where I would recording, and I'm also using my laptop instead of my desktop, which I normally use. So I have to check. Okay. Um, okay. So today our topic is about conservation processes. I'm supposed to give you um, a follow-up lecture about recording historic structures, making use of um, camera and the video. But to tell you the truth, I'm still looking for more materials for that topic. That's why I was not able to even send a recording, just as I promised last time. So I decided to continue doing that, develop the materials, and just go right ahead with the next lecture, which is about the conservation processes. Because after documenting, we're supposed to a we're supposed to use the um, we're supposed to assess, no, analyze the significance of the structure. Um, and after analyzing the significance of the structure, the next is we're supposed to recommend what conservation process to adopt. Um, by the way, I'm also using an internet which is time based, like they call it PisoNet. And so if ever my internet runs out, just wait a while while I reload. Okay, I lost track of how many minutes are left. So a heritage structure, or maybe it even applies to heritage objects. Okay, so for liturgical arts, can be the physical condition can be in any of these four. It can be in ruins or in abandon. So I think like the Parthenon that you tackle in your archist, or it can be intact. It's still there. It's never been modified. You're still using it. It's not abandoned, although it's a bit maybe rickety, or maybe it's still in good condition, or it's slightly modified. So the owner has made the little modifications, and hopefully the modifications are reversible, or it is heavily modified. So these are like the four major um, conditions where you can find your um, heritage structures. Okay, um, and then these are the conservation processes. So the first is preservation. So when it comes to preservation, you're actually simply maintaining the structure. Okay, you're not going to do anything except to make sure that it does not deteriorate further. Okay, so what you want to do is, aside from clean it up, is to make sure that okay, I mentioned to you about how water can probably um, deteriorate wood faster if it keeps on splashing on wood. So we avoid anything near the wooden structure where water can splash. No? Uh, so that's basically preservation. You're not adding anything. Um, Actually, you can add something, but you're not touching the structure. Okay, you can add something to actually protect it. Like you can actually put the whole ruins, for example, under a roof, if it's allowed. No? I mean, if the like if it's so significant, like in Egypt, when they have these boats where they carry the dead, and so instead of removing it from where it was found, they roof over it, so they preserved it. Okay, you can actually add something as long as not you do not touch the structure. Okay, so I hope that that's very clear. The second is restoration. So in restoration, you can repair, you can actually touch the object or the structure, but when you repair, you use the same material that was used before. And of course, you should also use the same technology. That's why in restoration, there's a lot of scientific study done to make sure that the material used is the same type of material. And it's not only the type of material, but the condition of the material. For example, if it's wood, so you have to know the amount of moisture on the wood of the existing uh, fabric, the heritage structure, so that the new wood that you will put, which is actually the same material, um, has the same moisture content. So that if the old one moves, so the new one moves with it. So so they move consistently. Okay. That's the same also with mortar. For example, in a stone structure, the mortar used is limestone. So what you use is, so we have to make a study, what is the composition of the mortar, um, how much of it is lime, how much of it is water, and how much of it is some other material for binding, whether it's egg or it's like horsehair, animal hair, or even some type of plants. So these are actually done. No? What we did, for example, in the Jesuit house, when we were repairing the roof, so we had to get samples of the mortar used for the roof and bring it to Japan for them to analyze. Okay, and then they come back with their results. Okay. The third is reconstruction. In reconstruction, you can introduce new materials. Okay. New materials, especially like alternate alternate materials. And you can only do this if the old materials is no longer available. For example, it's no longer possible to look for coral stones. Therefore, you can probably introduce an alternate material for coral stone. Um, or the type of wood is really impossible to look for because it's rare. So it's possible, no? But then it has to be explained in the documentation. And then finally, adaptation. Adaptation is actually like renovation. Okay, so you change a lot of things. The material, um, can also change especially the use. So a house may no longer be used as a residence. Instead, it is used as a museum or a souvenir shop or a restaurant or any other training center, for example. That's also possible. But the use has to be consistent or respectful to the structure. For example, you cannot reuse an old church and make it a discotheque like that. So there's um, there's something like something wrong with the way it's being used. So even though the structure is no longer used as that, like the church, but people still like give a um, like homage to it, no, for what it was before. So what are the characteristics of each type of conservation process? No? So for preservation, you only do maintenance. For restoration, you can do maintenance and repair using old materials. For reconstruction, you can also do maintenance, repair, or making old use of old materials or new materials you can introduce. And then for adaptation, you can go all the way to having a change. Okay, as I mentioned, change is equivalent to renovation. Now, maintenance means the continuous protective care of a place and setting. So it's different from restoration and reconstruction. Okay, so that's why it's more acceptable for preservation only. Now, if you have a ruin, what do you do? If it is highly significant, you should preserve it. Okay, so that's why we have to know the significance of the place because the conservation process will depend on it. We could also restore it if it is slightly uh, modified. No? If it's moderately significant, we can restore it, um, or we can also reconstruct it. And then if it is just contributory, so it can be used for adaptation. But if it is intact, okay, so we can, but if it's moderately significant, we can reconstruct, and then if it's only contributory, we can choose adaptation. If it is slightly modified, I went ahead earlier, no? So ruins, I mentioned slightly modified. I forgot that this is just ruins. Okay, so we can also do this preservation, restoration for highly significant, and then down to contributory, where we can reconstruct or adapt. No? But then if it is heavily modified, so there's no sense in preserving. There's nothing to preserve. Okay, in fact, there's nothing at all. Um, Normally, heavily modified structures are not significant anymore because they have been modified. So it's no longer intact. So most of the time they are adapted, no? Or they go to adaptation or what we call adaptive reuse. So last night I joined a conference of ICOMOS in Paris. It started at 3 p.m., but here in the Philippines it's 9 p.m. And then one of the questions that asked, because it dealt with authenticity. So one of the questions asks, how do you restore or reconstruct a heritage resource if there are no documentations? Okay, so it was a very interesting talk, no? So they said that okay, there has to be documentation done first before anything else. Okay, if there's difficulty in documenting, you should follow tradition. Okay, difficulty in documenting means probably there are no other basis for how it was done. Therefore, you should check how people usually do things and then you just adapt it. Okay. The problem is if there is no tradition. So what happens is if tradition does not help, it is best to simply preserve. So new structures or new use can be incorporated innovatively. So for example, um, imagine a watchtower which is ruins. Then you make a structure that does not touch the ruin, and then but envelopes it. Okay. Um, Another question which was interesting is when a heritage resource has gone through different layers of influences, what should be the basis of conservation? So, example, in Maribohok, there was the convent, and then it went through three stages of modification, and then so you have the original that was modified to become a school, and then much later it was modified again to improve the school, um, to add more uh, elements in the school. So when it was um, well, it fell down completely during the earthquake in 2013, so they have to rebuild it. But then we have to ask the community, okay, to what period do we need to review it? No? So it's important that the community should be consulted. And when they're normally the period where the resource is most significant should be retained. Okay, so therefore you have to check the history of the place. Um, Colon, for example, um, the original part of Colon is just very short. It was the time that the rich Chinese lived there in Darian. But then later the street became longer, and the golden era of Colon is something like early 80s, 70s, and 80s. And so the decision was to base it on that period, the 70s and 80s, to return it to that period. Although I don't think they pursued that rehabilitation of Colon. So that's all actually for that lecture. I did not give a lot of examples because I wanted to assign the examples to you. Um, so I'm giving you this assignment, but it says here that look for one example of each heritage resource that were in ruins or in fact slightly modified and heavily modified that had been conserved. Okay, then give a brief description of the heritage resource, the name, the location, its significance, and then describe how it was conserved and by whom. Now I'm going to um, assign the topic for each of you. Okay, so watch out for it in Canvas because you're going to submit it in Canvas also. So few will be assigned on to tackle ruins. Some will be intact structure, some on slightly modified structure, and some heavily modified structures. Um, what is important here is the samples should be in the Philippines only. It doesn't matter if it's outside Cebu as long as it is within the Philippines. Okay, so watch out for the detail of the assignment in Canvas. I will be posting it later. Okay. So, is there any questions say about your project? Wala na. Otherwise, I will just take a snapshot of the attendance, and that's it. No? I hope you are doing well. I'm in Davao City, and there's a storm here. But I'm actually in Bukidnon, but the storm is also here. Um, that's why I'm not in the usual place. So with that, thank you very much. I'm going to end the session now, and see you next meeting. So goodbye for now.